Welcome to Week 6 and Module 4. We are moving right along with our content. I hope that everyone is continuing to enjoy our class format. Please remember that your group case study presentation needs to be completed by the end of next week, Week 7. In Module 4, we will start to explore the helping relationship, pay attention to assessment and intervention strategies, and spend time thinking about how we can work with difficult clients. In fact, I'm going to break tradition next week, and I will have you read a chapter from a separate textbook about a specific model of crisis intervention. In Chapter 7, we will start our exploration of the helping process. First, the nature of the helping relationship is very different from other relationships that you might find yourself in. This relationship is different from a friendship in a lot of ways. What I tell my graduate students about the helping relationship is that this is not a reciprocal relationship. You, as the helper, are not there to get your own personal needs met. You are there to assist the client in meeting his or her own needs. Woodside and McClam highlighted the ways in which helpers and clients come together in this relationship. Both the helper and the clients will bring their own personal values, attitudes, feelings, experiences, and expectations into the relationship. The helper will also bring knowledge, training, and skills, while the client will also bring needs and problems. This relationship is purpose-driven, it is time-limited, and the focus of the relationship is on helping the client. The helping relationship is structured in a way that will allow the helper and the client to remain focused on the purpose of the relationship. Sometimes there are external constraints on the relationship, such as a managed care company limiting the number of sessions, or an agency that has certain policies in place about the length of the helping relationship. In general, however, the helping relationship will follow a fairly predictable sequence. First, the helper will need to prepare for the relationship. This might include reviewing client records, arranging the physical space, and completing any initial paperwork. As the client arrives, the helper's focus shifts, and now the helper's task is to establish the helping relationship. Remember that when a client is coming for help, he or she is probably in a vulnerable position, and part of our job is to quickly establish an initial rapport so that the client can begin to feel safe in the process. Once the client and helper have met, the helper will facilitate an exploration of the presenting problem. During this stage of the process, it's important to consider the client in his or her own context. Remember the notion of the whole person as you consider the client. This will allow you to offer more tailored approaches to the individual needs of the client as you begin to set goals and determine intervention strategies. Finally, as goals are obtained through intervention strategies, the helper will need to prepare to end or terminate the helping relationship. In my own experiences, the places that I've worked have had different structures around this general guideline. As such, flexibility is an important trait for human service workers. All relationships depend upon communication, and the helping relationship is no exception. In the helping relationship, the method of communication and the purposes of communication are different than they are in friendships or casual relationships. As you continue in your program, you will begin to explore many of the skills that Woodside and McClam introduce here. Probably one of the most important skills that you can develop is listening. I tell my graduate students that they ought to pay attention to the what of the client's message and the how of the client's message. The verbal message, or what the client communicates, is often not the whole story. What was the client doing as he or she told the story? Paying attention to nonverbal messages will give you a clearer sense of the client's whole experience. In Table 7.2 on page 211 in your text, Woodside and McClam listed several typical nonverbal messages. It might even be fun for you to start paying attention to the how of conversations that you find yourself in today. Whenever I learned about active listening, I learned the SOLAR acronym. In this particular model of active listening, the helper faces the client squarely, adopts an open posture, leans toward the client, maintains appropriate eye contact, and remains relaxed. Again, you will develop your own style of physical behavior in sessions, and this might even change depending upon your clients and their cultural norms. When you are in session with the client, your job is to encourage the client to talk about problems and concerns. Woodside and McClam discussed the 4 dimensions of attending behaviors in this chapter. These include eye contact, vocal qualities, verbal tracking, and attentive body language. Eye contact is different for different cultures. Be sure that you have a good idea of how to interact with your clients in this regard. The ways that you speak also communicate how you feel about another person. Be sensitive to this. Stay with the clients as they communicate. Tracking the client's story will be important in the immediate interaction, but you will also need to start building your mental file for this client. The story the client tells you today will also be important when the client returns for the next session. Finally, your body language is important. Remember, solar, and be yourself. As a helping professional, your responses to the client are purposeful and goal-directed. You will learn many different techniques for communicating in helping relationships. Asking questions is one particular skill that can be problematic if overused. Imagine yourself in a conversation with someone, and each time that person asks a question, you offer a response, and the person immediately asks another question. After a while, you might start to feel as if you're being interrogated. An over-reliance on questioning can hinder the helping process. In Table 7.4, Woodside and McClam lists several appropriate uses of questions: to begin the interview, to obtain specific information, to seek clarification, to elicit examples of specific behavior, and to focus the client's attention. One way to avoid the pitfalls of questioning is to avoid asking direct questions. These are questions that can be answered with a yes or a no. Instead, ask questions that are open. These questions will allow the client to express thoughts and feelings and will contribute to building rapport. Most of you will probably work with individual clients, but there's also a likelihood that you might see clients in a group setting. There are a number of different group formats. Self-help groups are common, and often those are open to individuals who share a similar problem. One good example of a self-help group is Alcoholics Anonymous. Other groups have a different level of structure. Another common group structure for human service professionals is the psychoeducation group. In psychoed groups, the helper will design activities intended to meet certain learning objectives. For example, imagine that you work at a local community food bank and you've learned that many of the consumers who visit your food bank have difficulty managing stress in healthy ways. You might design a psychoeducation group around the topic of healthy stress management and then invite the food bank clients to participate. This type of work is a lot of fun for me. I enjoy the dynamic nature of group work, and I believe that there are multiple benefits for clients that are not possible in individual sessions. First, by bringing people together who have a common struggle, you are facilitating a supportive network of peers for your clients. Second, your clients will see that the problems they face are faced by others too, so there is a process of normalizing the issue in a way that can serve to lessen anxiety. While most of your clients will be motivated to some degree to work with you, others may be more challenging. Woodside and McClam described a number of potential challenging client groups. I'll speak to a few of these. First, culturally different clients. Clients from different cultures, just like you, will bring in their values, attitudes, and beliefs. These may be different from your own set of values, attitudes, and beliefs. Therefore, paying attention to your own sensitivity to differences will be quite important. I encourage my counseling students to approach each new client with an attitude of curiosity. As you all know, two people from the same city or demographic background may have starkly different values and attitudes. In order to know how the client perceives his or her world, I have found that putting clients in a position of teaching me who they are is wonderful, and it continues to build the rapport. It continues the rapport building process. Secondly, resistant clients are difficult to work with. Sometimes their resistance may stem from a lack of motivation. If clients are not seeking out services voluntarily, then they may not readily engage with you. Even clients that begin with the motivation to be involved in the helping process might become resistant at some point. Usually whenever I experience resistance from a client that hasn't been resistant before, then I have a new clue about that person. Maybe the resistance surfaced after a particular topic of conversation. This would help me to know that the topic might be especially painful for the client, for example. What I've learned about client resistance is that it is more effective to find a creative way around the resistance than it is to confront the resistance directly. Now, sometimes you might have to confront directly, but as a general rule, I'd encourage you to be tentative and soft with your challenges rather than forceful and confrontational. For me, this has been a more effective approach. Woodside and McClam also discussed silent clients, overly demanding clients, and unmotivated clients. In my experience, all of these problematic characteristics are good information for me as the helper. For example, if I have a client that comes to counseling because of relationship difficulties with a partner, and I begin to experience this client as overly demanding, then I have a personal taste of what it means to be in a relationship with the client. This insight might allow me to be more sensitive and creative in my interventions. Alongside this general rule of softer confrontations, Woodside and McClam discussed a rather new treatment modality, motivational interviewing. MI has gained popularity in this era of evidence-based practice. MI is a strengths-based approach that pays attention to the whole person. The approach encourages the development of intrinsic motivation rather than external motivation. So, people want to change because they want to change, not because someone else is telling them to. The client and the helper will work collaboratively, and the client will draw from his or her own experiences with the process of change to determine goals for treatment. Throughout the process, the client is free to choose, and the client learns to accept responsibility for the choices that he or she makes. In addition to encountering people with different levels of motivation for change, you will encounter people who are in crisis. This crisis might come from a natural disaster such as a hurricane or flood, or from an emergency situation such as an unwanted pregnancy or a suicide attempt. We are actually going to spend a good bit of time discussing crisis intervention during Module 4. Next week, we will break with our tradition and you all will read a chapter from a different textbook that describes one specific model of crisis intervention. Woodside and McClam described several ways to define crisis. It's important to remember that the crisis is the individual's emotional response to an event rather than the event or situation itself. Given that, the same event might be a crisis for one person, but not a crisis for another person. The client's perception of the event is key. A crisis might be in response to a normal developmental process, such as changes during adolescence, or it might be in response to a situational or accidental event, such as an unplanned pregnancy or a natural disaster. A crisis develops in 4 phases, which are listed here. Woodside and McClam provide a good illustration of these phases in the story of Ben and Joan Matthews in Chapter 7. Your role in crisis intervention is to quickly establish rapport and establish an initial level of trust with the client. You'll need to have a network of referral services available to you in case the client's needs are beyond the scope of your practice. The story of Ben and Joan Matthews again illustrates many of the particular roles that you as the helper will need to fill. We'll discuss crisis intervention in more depth next week. In addition to both motivational interviewing and crisis intervention, another common strategy for human service professionals is resolution-focused brief therapy. In fact, I imagine that this particular skill set is one in which you will use frequently. In this approach, relationship building takes place first, as establishing a climate of safety will be critical to the success of the interventions. During the process, focusing on identifying client strengths. What has the client done in the past to successfully solve problems? Identifying client strengths is important in that the helper will want to know what the client has tried so far in regards to this problem. Next, the helper will work with the client to identify goals. Once goals have been identified and defined, then the helper and the client come up with a plan for meeting the goals. That's it for Chapter 7. Next week, your assigned reading is located in your Blackboard shell. Some of the content in this chapter may feel repetitive, but I believe that having multiple perspectives of this very important skill set is beneficial. Please let me know if you have difficulty accessing the file, and I will be sure that you get a copy.